Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Savides, and I am the chapter director for Startup Grind West LA. A lot of you that have received the email communications will know that this is the first event, not only this year, but since the start of the pandemic, which makes this talk even more relevant now, having such a unique guest on the podcast that we're showing today. And it's one that I've been really excited about, knowing that I could capture the time of Felix, as I know he's incredibly busy. So Felix Huttenbach is the CEO and founder of Sameday Health, as a lot of you will know from the email communications in which we have sent out. So Felix, first of all, thank you for setting aside the time to join us here. I'm sure that everyone that's watching live, as well as the people that will be watching the recording, will extract a lot of value, motivation, and inspiration knowing who you are personally. So before we get into it, this is the first event, and there will be future events coming along in the next coming weeks and months as we come out of the pandemic and when we can have in-person events. So please do look out for future communication, guys, and I'm really excited. We do have some very, very cool guests lined up. And talking about very cool guests, we have Mr. Felix Huttenbach. And yeah, I've never been more excited to have my first show with Felix.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So with the mismanaged and crumbling healthcare system being taken down by what some would call a raging pandemic, probably staring at the possibility of an economic downturn, Sameday Health not only set out to make some change and add real value, providing the best possible service that they could to allow people to not only book in a timely manner and get tested, but in the most efficient and effective way that was hassle-free. Those of you that have been tested by Sameday will know this. So with the client obsession at the forefront of the business, Sameday Health has evolved now from not only a COVID testing company, but into one that is a national full-service direct care provider with over 30 locations, probably more now, across 15 states. But the most fascinating thing is the hiring over 800 people. That is extraordinary. So the team comprised of passionate frontline workers, doctors, and scientists that set out to help ease the pandemic, testing hundreds of thousands of people across the country, and now helping local governments administer the vaccine. So I'm going to jump straight into it, Felix, now. So the business starting out in September last year, in 2020. So meaning that the company's been in operation for less than a year. What was the decision, and how did the idea come about that led to that initial go live in September last year?
Yeah. So at the time, I was working, or right before that, I was working at an early stage cancer detection company. So I was kind of deeply in the laboratory testing world. And as I saw the rising case numbers, and I also saw the way that the laboratories were taking in data and submitting results, I basically predicted that the system will collapse, and it's going to collapse brutally. So relatively early on, I think probably around May, June time, I already worked on some solutions that would streamline the process a bit more. And it was part of the cancer detection company. And it was specifically tailored for the movie production clients, because they were the first that had mandates to do like rigorous COVID testing plans. But pretty soon it was clear to me that this is not just something that the movie production clients needed. Like everyone needs it. Right? If you want to get a COVID test, or you want to see your friends and family, or if you're worried, you should be able to book an appointment, and you should also be able to get the results fast. And that just wasn't the case. So yeah, I think the product market fit, meaning you can book a result same day, and you get the results the same day. So when we started out, we had PCR turnaround times of sub 12 hours, whereas maybe the closest competitor was like 4 days. And that delta was just so large. Like the value that people were getting by coming to us was just so much better that the the product or the service kind of blew up, right? So we didn't have to do much marketing, but immediately our first location was full with people that wanted to get tested. And we kind of kept refining the underlying infrastructure, just really building like a solid system. And then we said, okay, now we have the floor plan, right? Like we know exactly this is the way the client has to go through it. This is exactly the way we set up the software. This is exactly how we integrate with the laboratories. And then we just started building locations one after the other. Yeah.
Okay, well that's actually perfect because it leads on to my next question. Being in multiple states across the US, especially at the height of the pandemic, how did you decide which states you wanted to go into? What is the process in which you followed?
It was not as systematic as I would have liked. But I think what we did was we looked at a certain demographic. We said, okay, what is the density that is there? What is the current positivity rate? So if you have like a relatively dense area and a high positivity rate, that's probably a place where you don't have much testing, right? So if you imagine that the actual positivity rate is the same everywhere, right? Let's imagine, right? The actual positivity rate is the same everywhere. But if you see then in the data that one place has like much more positives, that means probably that the people must be worse off until they get tested. So probably the testing that they currently have is not that convenient, right? You need to be feeling like absolute crap for you to then make yourself to one of those testing facilities. So this was one of the indicators when we see like high positivity rates, like which would indicate that the testing offering wasn't there. And I think we did a few of our locations, maybe 2 out of the, I think we have 50 now. So 2 out of the 50 didn't work out. But I think in most cases, what we built was really just needed everywhere. So I don't think that much strategy was needed at the time. Now it's different. But at the time, when we really started scaling it around Christmas, when I was going crazy with the case numbers, I mean, really anywhere our service would have helped.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think what I would like to find out is obviously there's various facets that contributed to this exponential growth and the eventual success of what Sameday Health is today. But in your mind, what was the key factors that contributed to that the most?
I mean, I think when we started scaling our operations and you look at the corresponding case numbers, I think that was just a huge factor, right? Like the demand was spiking so incredibly. So I think that probably is what contributed to that the most.
Okay. And just so everyone in the audience knows, and I'm sure you'll be okay with me saying this, Felix, is that Sameday Health never had any venture capital or large external funding. So I know a lot of people would love to know, because this is a question which I immediately thought of when I found out about the business. How did you scale so fast without typical investment? And if you had that investment, do you think you would have grown as fast as you did?
I honestly don't think it would. To the contrary, I actually don't think we could have been as fast had we had investors, because like we had because I was using my own capital. We didn't have to have a single meeting telling anyone why this idea is good, right? We didn't waste a second making a pitch deck. The only thing we did was, okay, what do we need to build now to bring this to the people? Every day, that was the only question we had to answer. So I think that actually, accelerated us and allowed us to be that quick. Another thing that really contributed to that is we were able to get quite favorable deals with the laboratories that allowed us to have negative working capital, and that I think was ultimately the key. Before that, I had a fitness equipment company where it was the exact opposite, and I knew all the pains that are associated with that. Right? Because you have massive positive working capital, you need to invest a lot of time and money to build up inventory, and then only then can you start selling. Right, and so there is no way. You have to convince investors to be able to fund that for you, so that you actually are able to build and then sell it. and you're constantly in this checkmate position where they're like, yeah, well, show me traction first, and you're like, well, how should I show you traction if I don't have the product yet?
Yeah.
Right. And I was constantly in that pain. So having a solution that we engineered with a negative working capital was, especially to me, what was amazing, right? Because I knew that I'm not dependent on investors, right? We can start selling the product, which is to the consumer, and then we had, let's say, like a net 30 for the laboratories to pay them, right? So we're basically able to fund the business and the growth with what the consumer was paying for the product.
Yeah, it's incredibly fascinating because, as most startups know, you typically have to go for funding, especially if it is a tech-heavy business, which actually leads to the question that I did want to ask you. So we all know, myself included, having a startup back in South Africa, how long it typically takes to hit the ground running. So what some people would do in 6-7 years, you managed to do in 5 to 6 months, which is insane, and I think something that I'm sure you're very proud of. But take us through some of the highs and lows in this short space of time. The business is not even 1 year old yet, so I'm sure the peaks and troughs have been exponentially increased by exposing yourself to such an exponential rise. So the question is, like, what have been some of the highs and lows that you've experienced that are worth telling the people?
I think being able to employ a lot of people was super exhilarating, right? Being able to take on real estate and give people jobs, that was always exciting. Like seeing the team grow, and like we have a lot of, like, because we were working so much, we're working day and night, every day, 7 days a week. Like we had like a lot of internal like slangs and slogans, like with our like small little team when we started out in Venice. I have like very positive memories about that. Some of the things that were extremely tough, I mean, we had in the beginning, we had times where the infrastructure collapsed. And when we just started out, we were mainly relying on third-party laboratories. So we would build software that would integrate with them. We did everything until the lab, and they were processing it. But right around Christmas time, some of the laboratories just couldn't deliver the turnaround time they promised us. But that ultimately didn't matter. So we had a lot of people whose Christmas plans were destroyed. And that was extremely saddening, right? You have hundreds of people calling you saying that they've missed their, and you really realize that every single tube that you collect, that's a story. That every little tube that you collect, there's a story behind it. There's someone's plan, there's someone's family behind it. So we said that was probably the most excruciating time. And that led us to make very aggressive investments, and we acquired our own laboratory then to make sure that, like, to kind of transition as many samples over to our own laboratories, because we ultimately care the most, right? No one cares about your clients as much as you do. So I think that was probably one of the more painful experiences.
So yeah, obviously dealing with people having to miss flights, going to these family events, and perhaps in some instances, some people's funerals, I would imagine, must have been incredibly heartbreaking and tough to deal with. And obviously, this is something that you were exposed to and never been exposed to before. It's a pandemic. No one's done this before. So when you speak, I like what you said about every tube has a story. I mean, that goes to what I mentioned right at the beginning, is that client obsession is at the forefront of this business. And for me, that is why businesses like Amazon are so successful, because they put the client first. And I like how you said you brought the laboratory in almost a vertical integration to cut those turnaround times now. So that leads me now to what you mentioned about the teams, having a strong team, I would imagine. And obviously hiring 800 people in 5 months, I don't think that's been done before. I mean, if it has, I would love to hear that story. But with going and hiring people, the question I have is, what kind of people were you looking for to hiring? I mean, and who was doing this hiring at such a large scale?
I think it would differ. So I think we have, one is the headquarter, and then one is the sites. I think on the headquarter side was probably a mix. Like whoever the manager was would be more responsible for that. So I was mainly hiring the engineers, and then Maxo, maybe some of the operations people. But for the sites, it was we worked with someone called Savannah, who was here basically from day one, and she was the one who, just had a very good hand in telling whether someone could be a good fit or not. And the way we did it is when we started out first, we flew her out to a new city to hire a team and then launch a site. And we realized that's not going to be fast enough. So then we did a new strategy, which we called waves. So we had 3 waves where we would interview people nationwide, and we would fly them in to a boot camp, teach them everything they need to know on how to do a site and who they need to hire in order to run a site. And then we flew them back, and they would hire on our behalf. So we did a lot of things that wouldn't be capital efficient, right? So we definitely didn't do it the most profitable way. Like we just wanted to have the biggest impact possible. So we gave them, unlimited credit cards, like everything you shouldn't do, unlimited credit cards, and they would basically just launch the site in 7 days, kind of like that. So a lot of things that we did were probably not that smart in hindsight for the profitability, but ultimately, I think it was very exciting that we were able to grow so fast because it wouldn't have worked otherwise.
Yeah, and I do think if you had taken on a more like restrictive approach, you wouldn't have achieved what you guys have achieved. And now you have a massive footprint in the United States. But I wanted to ask you a question. When you are hiring people, when you look to hire people, do you prefer experience or ambition?
I think we did mainly ambition for us in that sense. Now maybe it's starting to become different. Um, Now that we are so big, sometimes it makes sense to have an experienced person in there. But especially in the early days, like it was all about ambition and wit, because we didn't even know. I mean, one day you were in charge of launch site, the other week you're in charge of, I don't know, cleaning up the warehouse. It's like,
Wearing different hats, right?
yeah, it would switch by the day. Yeah.
That's interesting. And what role did you take on that you actually hated the most?
That I hated the most.
Yeah, if you can answer that question.
I don't know if there was one that I hated. I just remember that Savannah kicked me off of the site, basically, like after the 3rd day. She was like, you're stressing everyone out. You cannot be here anymore. So like our first location at Bikini, I wasn't allowed to be there because I was stressing everyone out.
There you go, everyone. You see, the CEO can come and cause a ruckus.
Yeah.
That's one thing for sure. So moving on now, considering everything you've said, where does your passion for health come from?
Honestly, I don't know where it comes from. I just know that that's something I really care about. Like I think there's a lot of stuff that we can take into our own hands in regards to our health, and I think that what's currently being provided to us is not great, even in America, right? It's such an advanced country, but then when you think about obesity rates and when you asked just your friends, hey, how is your healthcare experience? I mean, very rarely will someone tell you, oh yeah, it's great. Um, so yeah, that's why I think there's just a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, and I did listen to one of the podcasts that you're on, and I do recall you saying something that people just don't care, and I think that's so well in line with what your company is doing.
Yeah,
By
I
caring.
mean, on the provider side, which makes sense, right? Because if you are getting paid by an insurance company based on some codes that you write on a piece of paper, and not at all correlated with how you made the person feel, of course, over time, it's not going to lead to the best experience and the best results for the client or the patient, right? So I think ultimately the way the system is designed, it causes the people just to not care.
And
And
that's
that's what we
interesting.
did differently, right? We as like providers, we cared. We said, okay, if there is a way that we can make it better, then why don't we make it better? Right? Why is there no music? Why are there no palm trees? Why don't you have super nice staff? It's not illegal to have a nice like ambiance. Like, so why is no one doing that? So we said let's change everything that we don't like and just make it as good as we can.
Yeah, and just so that everyone that's listening live and everyone that will be listening to the recording, the first experience I had the same day was when I went for a COVID test in Abbot Kinney, which was your first site that you guys have had. And those of you that have been there will know that you walk in, and as Felix mentioned, there's music playing, there's palm trees. It looks like you're going to a coastal beach resort just for a COVID test. And I think for me, going through that experience, and also on top of that, I was in and out within 10 minutes, not even. And I think that's down to the technology that you guys had at the backbone of the company with regards to booking and having seamless transactions. And I think that's, for me, what differentiates you guys from other COVID collection companies. And I think it's something that you guys should be incredibly proud of. And I know you do pride yourself on that. And I think that's incredible. So, taking a bit of a step back now, I did a bit of research as one would do when they interviewing a guest. And I did see that you studied your undergraduate in Germany. And I think you did it in technology management and with a focus on mechanical engineering. And then you came to the US and you went to MIT Sloan and you did an entrepreneurship management course there.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at that, obviously the passion for entrepreneurship appears to me that it was always there. And you did mention briefly, and I'll just go into that now, this was not your first startup company. You had started a company called WeightX. And can you just explain to us what that business was like and how you went about that business and where it actually ended?
Yeah, so I started that one out of school. That was also not my first company, but that was like the first like venture, like larger vision company.
Okay.
So the idea was to build robotic fitness equipment where the resistance was created through an electric motor instead of weight plates. So it was a small machine that could do up to 200 pounds of resistance, and you can change the weights with your phone. And we started that out of MIT and got some traction there, but it was incredibly hard, especially on the fundraising side, right? Because you're constantly fighting this paradigm of you can't really produce it before you have money, but you can't really show the investors that you have traction before you can sell it. So you're constantly in this bind, and it was relatively tough. It did turn out quite okay. There were, especially around the IP that we've built, there was a lot of interest around that. And I ended up selling my shares in that company last year. And that was also what allowed me to then fund Sameday.
Okay, so is that where the funding, your own personal funding went into the business? Okay, that's very cool. So leading on from that, what were some of the key learnings you took from that business that you've implemented into Sameday Health? Even if it's just one aspect that you stand by since that business and you said, I'm definitely going to take this forward with me in any new business I go into.
I mean, I think there's just like this component that technology can make an experience like a lot better, right? That was the underlying hypothesis for WeightX too, right? Like with technology, you can make this fitness training experience a lot better. And I think that's what we did here as well, right? Like with technology, you can make the experience of getting a COVID test just a lot better.
Okay. Yeah, so obviously, and speaking to the community in which we're talking to, Startup Grind is a community of entrepreneurs, but mainly in the tech space and people doing amazing things. And I think a lot of people would want to ask the question, especially now that we're coming out of this COVID pandemic world, whether we are, whether we aren't, it's yet to be seen yet. But I know you get asked this question, and I do know that you guys are branching out into different products and service offerings now, where the company was initially same-day testing, it's Sameday Health now. Can you take me through, or take us through, the vision that you have for the business and some of the products and services that you add in now and that you would like to add in the future?
Yeah, I think we're still kind of at square one in that regard. The larger vision is that we could create a place that is like, that's somewhere where you'd almost like to go. And it teaches you and helps you with everything health related, right? So ideally, we would tailor to people that want to stay healthy, right? Not a place where you just go when you're sick. And so some of the products that we're launching is one part is retail, where we just showcase other products that we believe in, not necessarily our own. Then we want to offer IV drips, maybe vitamin shots, and longer term, even primary care, where we have a doctor on site that you can talk to, and also a doctor that can help you with your prescription management. So just a place that is just easier to go to than your traditional like primary care office. That would be the vision.
Okay. No, that's amazing to hear. That's amazing to hear. So now stepping away from same day health and COVID testing, by virtue of your last name, it appears that you're German. But a lot of people also don't know that you're also half Chinese. And for me, that's a unique combination of two different unique cultures. But one thing I did find out, and I found incredibly fascinating, and I did have to bring this up here, is that, as I understand, you spent a year at the age of 10 in the Shaolin Monastery in China.
Yeah, that's great.
For me, that's absolutely insane because I know what goes on in there from the research that I've done. But for the viewers and the people that are watching this, can you take us through that whole experience, why you went there, what you actually did there? And the last question would be is how that shaped you into the person you are today.
Mm. So at the time, my mother wanted me to go to China. So grew up in Germany, but my mother wanted me to have the Chinese side and live in China. And I basically said I would go under one condition, and that is when I get to train kung fu, which is what Jackie Chan did. It was my biggest idol there at the time, so that's what I want to do. So yeah, and actually ended up in that monastery. I think quite to my mother's disbelief, she thought she'd bring me there, and then I'd say this is horrible and leave. But I actually ended up staying and said, just bring me my clothes. And that's where I want to be. And so I lived with the monks for a year. And it was an incredible experience. It was very tough. Like you had 7, 8, 9 hours of training a day, every day, 7 days a week. The trainers would beat you with a bamboo. Quite hard, but it was ultimately a lot of camaraderie because you have all your fellow people with you. You're sleeping with like 40 people in the room, so you're like very much together, and you progress so fast, right? So I was able to do splits within 3 weeks.
Wow.
So that was all very exciting. So I think, yeah, it taught me a lot to deal with hardship, and then also showed me that it's very relative, right? Like what does suffering really mean, right? And I think that's really what, because I mean, there would be people in Germany where they'd say it's suffering if they cannot play in the sandbox, right? And meanwhile, over there, you're like doing an 8-hour training routine while getting beaten with a bamboo. So I think that was also something.
Yeah,
Like,
I definitely think that shaped you into the person that you are today. I mean, I know you personally, and you're a very resilient and determined person. And I would imagine a lot of that comes from those learnings that you took away from that. And especially at such a young age, it's absolutely insane. I can't even remember what I was doing at the age
it was
of 10.
probably harder. It would have probably been harder if I wasn't that young, right? Because when you're so young, like what's normal for you at the time? Whatever you see, that's what's normal, right? So when you're 10, there's not much. You don't have that much judgment. I think it probably would have been much harder if I went as a teenager.
Yeah, I can believe that because at that age you don't know what is right and what's wrong. You're a sponge. You
Yeah, it's
absorb
just like
everything.
fun. Yeah,
No, that's
exactly.
fascinating. And you did touch on someone that you looked up to, but I did have a question here that I'd like to ask you. I'm just going to get to straight shooting questions now before we close out. So, if you could have lunch with someone that's dead or alive, who would that be and why?
Hmm. I think Einstein is amazing. That would probably be fun to talk to him.
Yeah, I would imagine the kind of conversations that you could have
Or
with
Churchill. Churchill would be cool too.
Mr. Churchill. Okay. Yeah, for me, I think it would be Alan Turing, the
Mm.
the father of computer science and mathematician. I'm absolutely fascinated by Alan Turing and the
Mm.
story. And yeah, I think that's actually very cool people too. I'm surprised you never said Jackie Chan, but maybe next time, right?
I think I'll be able to talk to him one day.
Yeah, I agree. Living in LA, that opportunity is always there. And then coming down to the last two questions that I have now, if you had a billboard anywhere in the world, what did you say on the billboard?
If there was a
If
billboard,
you had a billboard and you could put it up anywhere, what would you say on that billboard?
COVID test same day.
Yeah,
Okay.
but there's not push. Yeah.
What would I say on there? I don't know.
What is like an ethos or a saying that you live by?
I mean, at Sameday we did just do it a lot, right? Because especially at this time, like there was like doing anything is better than nothing at the time. So I think that was a big part, right? Just constantly moving, constantly building.
Yeah.
And that's maybe changing a little bit now, but like that was definitely ethos when we grew. Just do it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's why you guys were able to grow so fast. I mean, that's incredible, and I think the last question I have, it is quite a serious question. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to, but it will settle a large debate amongst the audience. So, pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
Oh, I do have pizza Hawaii all day.
Right, there you go, everyone. So there you go. The debate has been settled. Pineapple on pizza. I myself feel the same. So, Felix, thank you so much. We have come to the end of this. Thank you for everyone. I can't thank you enough. Thank you for so much for the time. Do you have any questions or anything else you want to say to the audience before we jump off?
No, just thanks for putting this together. I think it's an amazing resource. I always enjoy talking or listening to those kind of podcasts. So I hope that there was some valuable things in here. But yeah, I think you're doing a great thing, and I'm gonna look forward to listening to your other guests.
Yeah, for sure. And just so everyone knows on the live stream and the recording that we do have a YouTube page now, Startup Grind West LA, where we will post this in the next couple of days. And as I mentioned before, please do look out for future communications. We are sending out regular communications of events, as well as follow our social media handles. And yeah, thank you everyone for your time. I'm super excited to see as the year unfolds what events we can bring on. And yeah, stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you very much. Felix, take it easy, man.